I didn't cry. I didn't argue. When my brother called to tell me he was taking my studio, I said okay, and I meant every letter of it, but not in the way he thought. Let me back up. My name doesn't matter. What matters is that 3 years ago, I was 27 years old, sleeping on an air mattress in a one-bedroom apartment in Columbus, Ohio, with $43 in my checking account and a folder on my laptop called The Plan. Inside that folder were spreadsheets, mood boards, zoning maps, contractor quotes, and one photograph, a crumbling 1920s firehouse on Delancey Street, that the city had listed for commercial lease at below market rate because nobody wanted to touch it. I wanted to touch it. I had spent 6 years as a junior floral designer at a corporate event company, arranging centerpieces for people who never learned my name. Every weekend, I'd drive past that firehouse on my way to someone else's wedding and think, that building wants to be something beautiful. I didn't know exactly what yet, but I knew it was mine before I ever signed a single paper. It took me 14 months to save enough for the first and last month's deposit. I negotiated the lease myself. I read every clause 3 times. And there was one clause in particular tucked inside the city's heritage property addendum that I read maybe a dozen times, highlighted in yellow, and quietly filed in the back of my mind like a card I wasn't ready to play yet. I'll come back to that. I spent the next 8 months restoring that firehouse with my own hands, and a small crew led by a contractor named Dennis, who charged me a fair rate because, as he put it, you actually know what you want, which is rarer than you think. We kept the original brick. We refinished the original brass pole. We turned the engine bay into an open floral design studio with 16-foot ceilings and north-facing skylights that made every arrangement look like it was lit by God himself. The upper level became a small event space, 40 seats maximum, perfect for intimate bridal showers, anniversary dinners, styled shoots. I called it Ember and Bloom. Within 5 months of opening, I had a wait list. My mother came to the soft opening. She walked through the space slowly, touching the walls, and when she finally turned to me, she said, "This is really something, sweetheart." That was the nicest thing she said all evening. The rest of the night, she spent on the phone with my brother, describing the space to him in detail I hadn't noticed she was collecting. My brother is 4 years older than me. He has, in our family's accounting, always been the one with potential. Potential, in our household, was a word that meant, he hasn't done it yet, but we believe him when he says he will. My brother has had potential for a restaurant since he was 22. He took a culinary class once, in 2019, and told our parents he was basically a trained chef. He has never, to my knowledge, worked a full shift in a professional kitchen. He has, however, borrowed money from my parents 11 times. I know because I helped my mother balance her checkbook the year she started forgetting to log things. I am not the one with potential in our family. I am the one with a job. This distinction had never bothered me much until the summer Ember and Bloom was 18 months old and turning a real profit for the first time. That summer, my brother announced, over Sunday dinner, that he had found his concept. A craft cocktail bar meets elevated sports lounge. He had a name already, the Atlas Room. He had a logo. He had a vision board on his phone that he passed around the table while my father nodded slowly and my mother said, "Oh, Marcus, that's brilliant." He had no location, no financing, no liquor license, no staff, no actual culinary or hospitality training. What he had was an eye on my building. He didn't say it that night. He worked up to it the way he always worked up to things gradually, with our parents serving as the soft cushion between his ask and any pushback I might offer. First it was, "Your place has such a great layout for a bar concept, don't you think?" Then it was, "I've been looking at spaces and honestly nothing compares to what you have." Then my mother, unprompted, said to me one afternoon, "Your brother needs a break. He's been trying so hard. Couldn't you two share the space somehow?" Share. As if Ember and Bloom were a childhood bedroom. I said no. Politely, clearly, and with reasons. The space was permitted for floral design and private events. My client base was built on the intimate, feminine aesthetic of the studio. A sports bar concept would destroy the brand I'd spent 3 years building. My brother heard my no and smiled, which should have been my first warning. 2 weeks later, he called me. "I need you to hear me out," he said, which is what he always says before he says something I will hate. "I talked to a commercial real estate attorney. Since you're leasing, not owning, the city lease can technically be renegotiated if a new business concept qualifies for the same zoning class. I've already submitted a preliminary inquiry. I'm not trying to take anything from you. I'm trying to build something. And you've already built yours. You have the contacts now. You could move. You could find a new space. I'm the one just starting out." I said, "That's not how any of this works." He said, "I've already talked to Mom and Dad." I said, "I see." He said, "They agree with me, and they're willing to co-sign a loan to help me cover the takeover costs. It would be a business acquisition. You'd get some money out of it. Some money. For 3 years of my life and every dollar I'd ever saved." I let the silence run long enough to feel uncomfortable. Then I said, "Let me think about it." "Don't take too long," he said. "I've already got a contractor coming Monday." I hung up the phone. I did not scream. I did not drive to my parents' house. I did not send a furious text. I opened my laptop, went to the folder called The Plan, created a new subfolder, and titled it The Clause. Here is the thing about the heritage property addendum I had read 14 months before I signed my lease, the thing I had highlighted in yellow and filed away like a card for later. The Delancey Street Firehouse, Station Number 7, was designated a community heritage structure by the City of Columbus in 1987. That designation came with a covenant attached to the property deed, not the lease, the deed that restricted the parcel from being used for any establishment whose primary revenue source was the sale of alcoholic beverages. The covenant had been written in response to a neighborhood petition after a previous attempt to convert the building into a bar in 1986. It had been renewed with the heritage designation and was binding on any tenant, any lease, any use of the property, regardless of zoning classification. A cocktail bar. My brother wanted to open a cocktail bar in a building that had a permanent, deed-level, city-enforced covenant prohibiting the primary sale of alcohol. I had known this for 3 years. I had built a floral studio, not a wine bar, partly because of it. I had never mentioned it to anyone in my family. Why would I? It hadn't been relevant. It was relevant now. I want to be honest about what I did next, because people sometimes hear this kind of story and assume the person was calculating and cold the whole time. I wasn't. The night my brother called me, I sat at my kitchen table for 2 hours, genuinely trying to figure out if I should just tell him. This won't work. Here's why. Here's the document. Save yourself the trouble. I thought about it seriously. I typed out the message twice. I deleted it twice. And then I thought about the 14 months I slept on an air mattress. The $43. The Sunday dinner where he passed around his vision board while my mother looked at him like he'd already built something. The sum money he'd offered me for the life I'd actually built. I closed my laptop. I called him back the next morning and I said, I've thought about it. I'll step back. But I need 60 days to transition my clients and find interim space. Can you give me 60 days? He said, You've got 30. I'm already behind on my timeline. 30 days. I said, Okay. My assistant, I'll call her by what she was to me, which is indispensable, had been with Ember and Bloom for 14 months. She had started as a part-time delivery driver and had quietly, methodically learned every part of the operation until she was essentially running client communications and vendor relationships on her own. She was 24. She was the first person I told everything to. The morning after I agreed to my brother's timeline, she sat across from me at the studio workbench and listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, So we're not actually leaving. We're opening a second location, I said. I've been looking at a space on Mercer Ave for 4 months. I was waiting until the finances were more comfortable. They're going to be more comfortable faster than I planned. What happens to this building when he tries to get the liquor license? The city will deny it, I said. Permanently. Covenant is on the deed. It supersedes anything he submits. She looked at me for a long moment. And then what happens to the $30,000 your parents co-signed for his renovation? That, I said, is going to be a very difficult conversation that I will not be part of. She nodded slowly. What do you need me to do? Start packing the things that are ours. Keep a detailed inventory. And when my brother's contractors arrive, make sure they sign in on the sheet by the door. Every single one. She raised an eyebrow. Why? Because if anyone damages our equipment or our structural modifications, I want a paper trail before the lease dispute even begins. I paused. I've already spoken to a property attorney. Everything we installed is documented with purchase receipts and installation dates. It's all ours. She smiled slowly. You've been planning this longer than last night. I've been planning everything longer than it looks like, I said. Have you ever had to do that, let someone walk into a wall you could see coming, just to make absolutely certain they understood the wall was real? It's harder than it sounds. Not because you feel guilty, but because you have to stay quiet. And staying quiet when you know something is its own particular kind of work. Over the next 30 days, I watched my brother sign a commercial renovation contract for $42,000. I watched his girlfriend post Instagram stories about our new venture with a location tag that was, bless her heart, the wrong street number. I watched my parents co-sign a business loan using their home equity as collateral, $20,000 toward the Atlas room build-out, because my brother had already burned through the first $12,000 on a logo redesign and a custom bar top that wouldn't fit in the actual space. I know about the bar top because the delivery driver called my number by mistake. My brother had put the old studio number as the contact, and I very politely explained the error and documented the call. I moved to Mercer Ave on day 28. My assistant handled the final walkthrough. We left the space clean, the keys on the hook, and a note that said, Wishing you all the best with your new venture. We meant it in the most precise possible sense. My brother took possession on a Thursday. By the following Monday, his contractors had removed the vintage lockers I had deliberately not taken, because they were original to the firehouse and protected under the heritage designation, meaning he legally could not remove or alter them without city approval, which I had also known and chosen not to mention. He called me that evening, furious, saying the lockers were blocking the bar layout. I said, Those are heritage fixtures, Marcus. You'll need to apply for a modification permit with the Historic Preservation Office. It usually takes about 4 months. 4 months? Are you serious? I should have mentioned that. I'm sorry. He got the permit expedited. It cost him an additional $3,000 in consulting fees and was allowed to relocate the lockers, not remove them. His bar top did not fit. He ordered a custom replacement. The timeline slipped 6 weeks. I was, by this point, 3 weeks into soft launching Ember and Bloom on Mercer Avenue. The new space was smaller, but the light was better. My waitlist followed me without a single prompt. My assistant had sent a simple, warm email to our client list, explaining we had outgrown our original home and were thrilled to welcome you to our new studio. The response rate was 91% positive. 3 clients sent flowers. I put them in the front window. My brother's grand opening was scheduled for a Saturday in October. He had, by then, spent $58,000 in total. The loan, the equipment, the permits he knew about, and the ones he'd had to pay to learn about. He had applied for his liquor license through the Ohio Division of Liquor Control 8 weeks before opening. He had paid the filing fee. He had passed the responsible vendor training. He had done, from what I understand, everything correctly within the process. The denial letter arrived on the Wednesday before his Saturday opening. I know the exact timing because my mother called me at 7:14 inches the morning, before I had finished my first cup of coffee, crying in a way that meant something had gone very wrong. The city denied his license, she said. They said there's some kind of old rule about the building, a covenant. Marcus says it can be appealed, but the attorney is saying the covenant is permanent. Is this something you knew about? I said, Mom, I want to be completely honest with you. Yes, the covenant is in the Heritage Property Addendum. I read it when I signed my lease. I built a floral studio because it was compatible with the restrictions. I genuinely assumed Marcus's attorney had reviewed the deed before he signed anything. The silence on the other end of the line lasted long enough that I counted to 11. You didn't tell him, she finally said. He didn't ask me, I said. He told me I had 30 days to clear out. Another silence. Mom, I said, more gently. Whoever he hired to handle the business acquisition should have pulled the deed and reviewed every covenant before he spent a single dollar. That's real estate law 101. This isn't my error. I'm sorry it happened. I genuinely am. She hung up without saying goodbye. I finished my coffee. My brother did not cancel the grand opening. I will give him credit for this, because it showed a particular kind of stubbornness that I think he may eventually put to good use if he ever points it in the right direction. He announced that the Atlas Room would open as a craft mocktail and elevated dining concept while the license appeal was pending. He posted about it on Instagram. His girlfriend went live from inside the space at 7 o'clock on Saturday evening, showing off the bar top that had eventually fit, the pendant lights, the reclaimed brick walls that had, after all, turned out beautiful because the building was beautiful. 40 people showed up. It was, by his own later admission, going okay. Then the fire marshal arrived, not because of the license, because someone and I have never established who, nor did I look very hard, had submitted a concern about the modified egress layout after the heritage lockers were relocated. The fire marshal's inspection found that the relocated lockers had inadvertently narrowed a secondary exit corridor by 11 inches below code minimum. The Atlas Room was ordered to clear the space immediately pending a corrected layout inspection. 40 people filed out into the October night. His girlfriend's live stream caught all of it. She didn't stop recording. I think she didn't fully understand what was happening until the fire marshal's jacket was clearly visible in frame, and someone in her comment section typed, oh. The clip circulated for about 48 hours in local Columbus Facebook groups, mostly with sympathetic commentary. A few people recognized the building as the old Ember and Bloom location, and started asking questions. My assistant screen captured every relevant post, organized them by date and time, and sent them to me in a single document labeled "For Your Information" with no other comment. She is exceptionally efficient. My brother called me the night of the grand opening, after everyone had gone home. I answered, "Did you know about the egress issue too?" he asked. "I didn't," I said. That was true. The egress issue was caused by his relocation of the heritage lockers, which was caused by his bar top not fitting, which was caused by him not measuring the space before ordering custom furniture. That chain of events was entirely his. "I've spent $60,000, he said. "Mom and Dad's house is collateral on 20 of that." "I know," I said. "What am I supposed to do?" I thought for a moment. Not about how to hurt him more, because I wasn't interested in that, but about what the actually honest answer was. "You have a beautiful space," I said. "The building is genuinely stunning, you know that. The covenant restricts alcohol as a primary revenue source, which means a restaurant that serves wine and beer as a secondary offering would likely be permissible. You'd need a restaurant liquor license instead of a bar license, which has different criteria. You should talk to a hospitality attorney, not just a real estate one, and find out if that's a viable path." He was quiet for a while. "Why are you helping me now?" "I'm not helping or not helping," I said. "I'm just answering the question you asked." Another silence. "You knew," he said. "About the covenant." "I did." And you let me walk into it. You gave me 30 days, Marcus. You had already hired a contractor before you called me. You had already talked to Mom and Dad. You had already decided. The only question was whether I was going to hand you every piece of due diligence I had spent 3 years gathering due diligence that you should have hired someone to gather yourself so that you could take my studio with slightly less collateral damage. I paused. The answer to that question was no. He didn't say anything for a long time. The egress fix will probably cost you $4,000, I said. The restaurant licensing path might actually work if the kitchen can support a full menu. The space is zoned for food service. Get a proper attorney this time, not just the cheapest one. Why are you telling me this? Because I'm not trying to destroy you, I said. I'm just done building things for other people to take. He hung up. I sat in the quiet of the Mercer Avenue studio, surrounded by flowers in the last arrangement of the evening, and I felt something I hadn't expected. Not satisfaction exactly, more like the specific relief of a door closing that had been open too long, letting in cold air. My parents sorted themselves out over the following months, in the way that people sort themselves out when consequences arrive and cannot be argued with. My father, who had always been quieter about the favoritism than my mother, called me 6 weeks after the grand opening fiasco and said, very carefully, I think we've made some mistakes in how we've handled things with you two. He didn't elaborate. I didn't push. It was the most honest conversation we'd had in 10 years, and it lasted 4 minutes, and I valued it more than an apology 3 times as long would have been worth. My mother took longer. She came to the Mercer Avenue studio for the first time in February, on a Tuesday morning when we were closed, because she'd asked if she could come when it was quiet. She walked through the space the same way she'd walked through the firehouse slowly, touching the walls. At the front window, she stopped at the arrangement I'd left there from the weekend. Ranunculus and eucalyptus and a few stems of dried pampas grass. Nothing complicated. You've always had it, she said, not looking at me. Had what? The thing that makes a space feel like something. She picked up one of the eucalyptus stems and turned it in her fingers. I don't think I ever told you that. I told her she could keep the stem. She carried it to her car. My brother pivoted. The egress was fixed in 5 weeks. Not $4,000, but $6,200 contractor upcharge. Because Marcus didn't get 3 quotes, which was a lesson I had learned at 24 that he was learning at 32. He restructured the concept around a small plates dinner menu with a limited wine list, which qualified for a restaurant license, which the building's covenant permitted. He hired a general manager with actual hospitality experience, a woman who had been running a gastropub on the north side and who, from what I heard through the local small business community, ran a very tight operation. The Atlas Room opened quietly on a Tuesday in March with a reservation-only soft launch. It wasn't my style, what he built, but it wasn't bad. He texted me a photo of the interior the morning of the soft launch. No caption, just the image. I looked at it for a while, the pendant lights catching off the bar top, the brick walls, the brass pole I had kept because it was original to the building, and because it was beautiful, and I texted back. Looks good, he replied. Thanks for not telling me about the restaurant license path on day 1. I said. You didn't ask. He said. Yeah. And then, for the first time in longer than I could easily count, we didn't say anything else. And that felt like enough. My assistant runs the Mercer Avenue studio now. She is no longer my assistant, she is the studio director, a title that came with a real salary, real benefits, and real equity in the business going forward. I told her this over coffee on a Monday morning and she stared at me for a full 10 seconds before she said, I'd like to see that in writing. I had the letter drafted already. She read every clause and signed it at the kitchen table in the studio, then went immediately back to work. She is, in this way, very much my kind of person. Ember Bloom is expanding. Not because my brother took the firehouse, I want to be precise about this. The Mercer Avenue location had been in the plan for over a year before any of this happened. It was always the next step. What my brother's move did was accelerate it. Strip away the comfort zone of a building I had come to love too much to leave on my own, and push me into something better on a timeline I might have found reasons to postpone. I am not grateful for what he tried to do. I want to be equally precise about that. He tried to take something I built because he assumed I would absorb the loss the way I had always absorbed losses quietly, efficiently, without anyone having to acknowledge the cost. He was wrong about that. The grace period for absorbing those costs without consequence had ended sometime around the moment I spent 14 months on an air mattress to build something nobody handed me. But the result, the Mercer location, the partnership with my studio director, the clients who followed us without hesitation, the particular satisfaction of a plan executed in total silence over 30 days, while someone else talked about their vision board, that result is mine, in a way the firehouse alone never quite was. $62,000 is a painful lesson. But some lessons only land when they cost something real. I didn't steal anything. I didn't sabotage anything. I simply built something well, read every document I was given, remembered what I read, and waited. That's the strategy, if you want to call it one. Not revenge exactly. More like, when someone moves against you with speed and noise and the confidence of someone who has never had to do their own due diligence, move slower, move quieter. No more than you say. And let the gap between what they assumed and what is actually true do all the work for you. My grandmother called it still water. She meant that what looks calm on the surface is not always shallow. I used to think she was talking about patience. I think now she was talking about this. The advantage that comes to the person who reads the whole document, every time. Read the whole document. Every time.